Welcome to the Hollis Chapman Show, where we celebrate the power of words and the beauty of storytelling. Join us on this journey as we delve into the minds of successful authors and small business owners who have mastered the art of crafting captivating narratives that inspire, educate, and entertain. Prepare to be inspired as we explore the boundless possibilities that come from sharing stories and experiences that shape our lives and ignite our passions. Through heartfelt conversations and insightful discussions, we uncover the wisdom and creativity that fuel these incredible individuals in their pursuit of greatness. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let the magic of storytelling transport you to new worlds and perspectives. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and uplifted as we embark on this storytelling journey together. Stay tuned for an episode filled with wisdom, inspiration, and the power of words. Welcome to the Hollis Chapman Show. Say where stories come alive. Let's begin this adventure together. Don't miss out on the opportunity to connect with some of the most talented and compelling voices in literature today. Tune in and let the journey begin.
Hey everyone. Welcome to the Hollis Chapman Show. Happy Thursday. This is a special today, and we got a great guest for us. Awesome guest. Our guest is a retired Major General from the United States Air Force. 30 years in. Bless his heart. Thank you for your service, sir. He rose to the ranks to Major General, fighter pilot, outstanding combat veteran, outstanding, and graduate of the United States Air Force Fighter Weapons School. Without further ado, let's welcome to the show, author, Major General, Mr. Barry. Thank you, sir. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you very much for the invite.
No problem, sir. Hey, tell us a bit more about yourself. I mean, I'm looking at your bio. Beautiful career, unbelievable career. A little bit more about your bio, plus your new book, sir. Talk about that.
Well, thank you for that. Well, everybody has windows in history, so here are some of mine. As you mentioned, I was 30 years in the Air Force as a fighter pilot, combat commander, strategic planner for the Air Force at the Pentagon, and later worked in education, nonprofit, and aviation. So I was a White House fellow while I was still on active duty in NASA during the Challenger teacher in flight mishap. It really was a sad story, but an incredible window in history. I served as a military assistant to the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, when the USSR collapsed and Desert Storm took place. I had the opportunity to be at the Pentagon, unfortunately, on September 11th, and served on the Columbia Accident Investigation Board on my last assignment on the Air Force as the board member and the executive director. Remember, Challenger occurred in 1986, and I was a White House fellow then, but Columbia happened in 2003, 17 years later. So after the retirement from the Air Force, I had been a little busy, but I was a vice president of SAP at a software company for 3 years. I had the opportunity, believe it or not, non-traditional, to be a superintendent of schools for 42,000 kids in 60 schools here in Aurora Public Schools for 7 years. And then I was a CEO briefly for about 3 years for the Denver Boys and Girls Club. And then just retired as a CEO of Wings Over the Rockies Museum here in Denver after 8 years. And so now that I'm retired, I had a chance to write a little bit, and that's my book, Power and Peril, which examines one of democracy's oldest challenges. And that challenge is how a nation exercises power without weakening the institutions that protect liberty.
Before we get to the book, sir, because when I talk to military people who were in 30 years, 40 years, and this and that, what kept you getting up every day to put the years in? I put in 5 years. That was a hard 5 years for me. How did you put in 30 years? What was your motivation every day to go and do what you do? Obviously, you loved it, but was there a certain thing that really kept you going in 30 years? Just share a little bit of that with us.
Sure. Well, 30 years, 24 moves, 30 years. So my family moved around quite a bit. But getting up in the morning, besides the aspect of flying, but it really is the dedication and the people you work with. I mean, that's the real value of being able to be in the military, because you meet some amazing people and you have the opportunity to visit and tour and travel, but the opportunity to help defend this nation was the utmost thing. It was embedded in me at the Air Force Academy after 4 years, and it was an honor to serve all those years.
I grew up in Plattsburgh, New York, so Plattsburgh Air Force Base that's
Okay.
where I grew up. Power and Peril. What was a wow moment that you said, okay, I got a lot of this inside me, I'm going to write this book? Power and Peril, how that come about? And talk about the cover, because it's a beautiful cover, powerful title. Talk about that.
Well, power is always among us, but
Yeah.
peril, that happens when we don't restrain power. And then, one of the things that I've studied in my history was that this great nation of ours developed an incredible document called the Constitution. And we're going to celebrate that in 11 years. 11 years will be the 250th anniversary of the Constitution. But, when people know about the Constitution, but to understand how significant it was for that time, because nowhere, we had the Magna Carta in England. So there were attempts to try to do what our founding fathers did. But just think about it. Power in that day was determined by kings and queens and dictators and conquerors. It really was a unique element to do that. And our founding fathers studied people like Rousseau and Locke. Rousseau believed that power came from the people, not from a king. Locke believed that the separation of power and checks and balances was the way to contain and restrain a power, and where no one could go. But balance of power. We have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, we have the basic capability for the Supreme Court. Those balances of elements, and then the checks and balance, because they can check on each other. The House can check on the President can check on the House, the Supreme Court finally decides on what's constitutional or not. But to have those kinds of things, and it always reminds me of this amazing question that was posed to Benjamin Franklin. And the question came from a woman named, I forgot her name right now, but she came to forward and said, "Doctor, what do we have?" And his aunt, "Do we have a monarchy or do we have a republic?" And he said, "We have a republic if we can keep it." So those are the kinds of things that really interested me, and particularly in this time of challenge that we're living in right now. And that's why I wrote the book.
Outstanding. Well done. In your view, are the most pressing internal weaknesses with the United States that could compromise national security?
Well, I believe our greatest internal vulnerabilities right now are a number of things. You can think about political polarization, declining trust in institutions, misinformation. I mean, AI is going to be always a challenge in some of those regards, and the weakening of constitutional norms. Foreign adversaries, they're pretty smart. They can exploit those divisions without firing a shot. The answer is not simply stronger government. It is stronger institutions, better civic education and responsible leadership, and citizens willing to distinguish facts from political rhetoric. So one lesson that I gained from the Columbia Acts investigation when the space shuttle failed in 2003 was that disasters rarely begin with one catastrophic decision. They develop when organizations normalize warning signs and stop listening to dissent. So that's what I think is probably the most pressing international weaknesses that we're facing with right now.
But if you didn't do that, the United States, they got some powerful ships, they got some huge ships. I was like, wow, who the heck want to go to war with us when I'm sitting there being, watching all these huge, wonderful ships coming in port? Weaken the nerve of us to other people looking. They say, oh, well, little Iran can do this, so can we. This little country do this to this mighty United States, so can we. That's my thought about what is going on right now. It weakens us in a sense where, if you go to a dogfight and you bring these big pit bulls, we don't want to fight that. Look at what they got coming around here. But now that they saw that we can be weakened, it's horrible, in my opinion, right?
Well, that certainly is challenging. One of the things that I've learned over years is, is the difference between tactical and strategic focus.
Yeah.
Let me demonstrate that a little bit. Maybe it was a lesson we learned the wrong way with Venezuela, because it was pretty easy to go in there. But Venezuela was a country that was really dependent upon one dictator. you remove that dictator, and the whole country pretty much collapses in a lot of ways. That's an interesting lesson. But when you apply that kind of same logic to Iran, Iran has got 2,000 years of history. They have got a bureaucracy that rivals very little. It's also a religious zealot or country. So when we took down the leadership there, without a strategy on how to be able to end the result, and when it didn't result in the collapse, it really was a different focus. So, we've had some tremendous tactical successes, both in Venezuela and in Iran. Now, our military has done amazing things. But the bottom line is, if you don't go in there with a strategy like we had in Desert Storm, when I was working for Secretary Cheney, I watched President Bush, he said we need to remove Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. And when we accomplished that, we got out of there. We finished it. And we have to have a strategy. And that's one of the big lessons learned, clearly.
Outstanding. Well said, sir. Thank you. How nations drift towards uncertainty, not only through external threats, but also through internal overreach, institutional weakness, and the abandonment of strategic plans. So you mentioned strategies, you mentioned all this stuff like that. So nations drift towards uncertainty. So right now we got a lot of uncertainty in Europe. We got uncertainty. We don't trust his word says one thing, he does another thing. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. So give us a little insight about that, sir. Uncertainty with the other countries around the world, because some things will get said, the mind will change the next day. You write on your website, it's like, oh man, this is crazy. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's an interesting concept that I have in the book, in that it really talks about Steve Bannon, who worked for President Trump for a while, came up with a concept called muzzle velocity. And things come at us so quickly. There's not a day that the administration is not on TV, And the problem is, with our democracy and our republic, when things come at us, the press reports on it. But before we can really deep down and delve into it, another issue comes up the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And that's what I call muzzle velocity, but also is another term called distraction politics. Because when you're distracted one day with one thing, and then another thing comes up, it tends to dilute the ability for us to be able to delve down into the significance of the previous day's issue. So what I see right now is we're missing a consistency of credibility, because when we keep saying one thing and then we say another thing the next day, or we back off, it doesn't lend into an element of credibility that we had really since World War II. And that's what our allies depended on. But when we're not consistent, when we're erratic, that causes some incredible disruption, I think, not only within our country, but also on the international scheme.
Just reading some of your stuff, the growing tension between populist politics and constitutional governance. Again, I'm not a big talk on the show politics guy, but you've seen a lot, you've done so much stuff like that, and your book kind of leads towards that. And it's very frustrating to see the things out there that's going on. I say again, I love this country. I love everything about this, stuff like that. But boy, you can get really, really upset at certain things that happens, and stuff like that. The immigration. I had a lady on last week about immigration. Wonderful lady. Her family immigration is wonderful. Very proud. And that's what we should be. Let's talk a little bit about the growing tension around Europe, around the world, about what we're doing as a society.
Well, in the book, Power and Peril, I explored the enduring relationships between leadership, power, institutions, and the long health of the American constitutional republic. But let me just talk about one thing, and that is the issue of the current American foreign policy. For 80 years, American foreign policy was built on a remarkable proposition: the United States could become more powerful, became more powerful by helping construct a world in which it didn't always exercise its power alone. We work with allies.
Yes.
And right now we're testing opposite proposition that the American becomes stronger by becoming less constrained by the institutions, alliances, and expectations. So let's just look back to 1945.
Yes.
The United States emerged from World War II in a position no nation had occupied in modern history. Its homeland was largely untouched by war. Its economy represented an extraordinary share of global production. Its military possessed the atomic bomb, and Europe was much, and Asia lay devastated. And we had Truman and Eisenhower, and they put together NATO, they put the United Nations, we got Bretton Woods. It was hardly an altruistic system. We benefited from tremendously. But every president since Truman modified that system. But today, America becomes more of a, transactional foreign policy, and that's what I worry about right now. We think about the changes from alliances and strategic assets to alliances, conditional bargains, from free trade to economic power as an instrument of national security. Multilateralism is being disrupted tremendously, and bilateral and leader-to-leader diplomacy seems to be the way we're going. When we talk about promoting an international order, well, it's weakened now by asserting national interest and sovereignty and using transactional, goals and objectives. The predictable deterrence that we had before is now strategic unpredictability, and that's what I really worry about. From institutional foreign policy that we had, in place and well established since World War II, is now it's highly personalized, presidential foreign policy. So here's the way I would describe it. American power is what we had since 1945, with alliances and institutions and predictability and deterrence and international order. Today, American power is based on leverage and negotiation and reciprocity and transactionalism and really demonstrating the advantage that the United States has to pressure people and do it. So that disruption for me, is something that concerns me in a lot of ways. And I hope we're going to settle down on that. So in the book, power can produce immediate results. Restraint, institutions, and durable relationships with our allies determine whether those results become lasting strategic successes. And that's what I think we need to be able to concern ourselves about.
Our special guest today is Major General John Barry, retired, author of Power and Peril. So where do we go after this show to get more information about you and to buy your book? Where do we go?
Well, my website is John L. Barry, so make sure you get the L in there, as BARRY.org, johnlbarry.org. And on there you can see where you can get it on Amazon. It's officially out September 8th, but you can make a pre-order buy. And I think hopefully if you find it of interest, I think it should answer a lot of questions, because one of the things that, I'm a big fan of Walter Isaacson, a great historian and a great writer of biographies. And he was asked one time, what is the one thing you hope that the American people maintain? And that's curiosity. And that's what I tried to do in this book. I kept asking myself questions. Is this normal? Can we look back at history and see how we can compare it to today? And how much different is what's going on today compared to where we've been? History doesn't repeat itself, but it does echo. And I think that's where we really get our strength from, if we can really have that strategic laboratory. And that's what it is. History is a strategic laboratory that can really, teach us how to be able to handle things. And unfortunately, we don't do enough of that in this country right now.
Have you seen examples in your career where alliances either succeed or fail in the face of instability?
Well, let me go back, for a while here. We had this thing called the Concert of Europe in the 1815 to 1914 timeframe. That's when we had Bismarck in Germany, we had Disraeli and Gladstone in England. Russia was Alexander II. Austria-Hungary was Jules Ferry. There was a time there where they agreed on, basically spheres of influence. And it worked for a while, but eventually it ended up with World War I, as a case in point. So those alliances, were kind of what we're heading towards now, because with our current national security strategy that was just published by the administration here 6 months ago, it's really North and South America is ours, and it is really not the way to operate. And let me give you an example. When I saw what happened in Desert Storm, you had President Bush, we had Secretary Baker, we had, Secretary of Defense Cheney. Um, what they did is they organized an alliance that really had never been seen since World War II. We had 60 nations involved. We had the approval by the Congress. We had the approval by the UN. We went in there, and in 42 days of combat, 38 of which is in the air, and 4 was on the ground, an amazing demonstration of cooperation between the services, and we kicked Saddam Hussein out of the country. Now that is an example of an alliance that worked. What we're doing now is we're basically alienating ourselves from around the world. And I'll tell you, one of the facts that is pretty interesting to think about is that America first results in the world making other plans. Other countries are going to other places now besides the United States to be able to, not just economic, but militarily, treaties. We just recently saw Turkey and Saudi Arabia, which really don't really get along for all these years. They're moving in where they're signing a document that was like the NATO Article 5. Attack against one is attacking against all. I mean, so what we're seeing now is we're losing the predominant element where, countries came to us for that element of security and consistency and credibility. And that's what's really got me worried. And that's what the book is mentioning. But by looking back in history and comparing what we're doing today to what would happen in the past.
Can it be fixed? Say this minute, when this administration is done, can it be fixed? Can it be fixed?
I certainly think it can be fixed. And, if you looked what happened in the Suez Canal back in the 1950s, the United States really went against England and France. And it was pretty tumultuous. It wasn't really a happy arrangement during that time, even in spite of, NATO and the UN and all that stuff. But we rebuilt those partnerships and reestablished ourselves. I think when we think about some of the different controversies, like in France, I mean, France kicked NATO out, during the 1960s, and we were able to regroup that kind of relationship in a more positive manner. So what I think sustains us is the institutions, that are strengthened and survive the test of time, not the personalities. And I think we do have a possibility, certainly, to recover on our ability to deal well with our allies and have that cooperation and collaboration that we've had in the past.
It's, again, look at some of the stuff that Iran's doing. I think they're dragging their feet, to be honest with you, until this administration changes. I think they're sitting there saying, we'll just hold on, and all of a sudden, because they see that the numbers aren't good for this administration. So if they can hold on, maybe they can sit there and say, okay, the next administration we can have a conversation with and do some things. Do you think that, or am I just assuming wrong?
No, I think you're exactly right, because Iran, as Russia is, as China is, are incredible students of us, students of the United States. They know how we operate. In our short time frame, like China's got always the long view. Now, Iran has got a long view in this regard, too, because I think they're waiting for the midterm for sure before they'll have any kind of serious negotiations. And they have even said publicly that they're going to wait until, the Trump administration, is over at the end of their time. So I think what they're hoping is that either the midterm, the House and the Senate will flip, and, it'll be tougher for administration to impose what they want to do. They're great students of our history, and they understand our government. So I think you're exactly right.
Yeah. You want us to help you now? I don't think so. We'll just wait this out. You want our help? Too late. We'll just play this out long term. Yeah. What concrete actions do you believe the United States needs to take in the next 5 years to address some issues?
Well, for sure, the elements of, the 250th anniversary is kind of a unique time for us to relook at how we operate, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not just the executive branch; it's also the legislative branch and the judicial branch. You know, right now, you know, we have a pretty weak Congress. They're not owning up to what their responsibilities are insofar as, you know, the War Powers Act, you know, their ability to be able to, you know, discuss and debate, you know, in a positive manner. Yeah, they can disagree, but they can't be so antagonistic they won't even talk to each other. That's got to be fixed. The administration, you know, clearly, I think, needs to be able to be more focused on strategy instead of tactics, you know. But the one that I think I'll just bring up in the book, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is an amazing organization, you know, but they have three different speeds, is the way I put it. The normal docket, you know, takes, you know, the lower courts bring a case forward, and it takes years and months and years before it gets before them, where they have written briefs and oral arguments and the public sees it, and then months and years go by and a decision is made. The other one that I'm worried about is what is called the emergency or the shadow docket. Now, this is something that President Trump has skillfully used, I mean, whether you agree with it or not, to his benefit, because he has asked for emergency decisions by the Supreme Court that are not meant to be permanent, they're meant to be temporary, but, you know, when it is done kind of in a blind way, because they vote, obviously, because if it's voted in his favor, it's got to be at least 5 out of 9. But you don't know who voted. You don't know what was discussed. And it's meant to be a limited time frame. So when you think about it, the time frame goes something like this. Days or weeks go by, limited briefing, full court considers the emergency request. Usually there's no oral argument that certainly is made to the public. Majority determines the outcome, and then individual votes may not be disclosed. So you don't know who voted for what. And what was fascinating when I look back in history, it has been there the whole time, and presidents have used it from time to time, but not on the level that President Bush has. I mean, President Trump has. When you look back at Bush and, you know, Reagan and certainly Clinton, the number that Bush has used in the first administration that he had was, he used it 41 times and he won 28. So he had this ability and history and knowledge on how to use it. Today in this administration, in less than 10 years, he's used it 28 times and has 21 decisions ruled in his favor. That's the one I think we have to be a little bit more aware of and actually concerned about.
Yeah. I see that people drag their feet because they don't want to get fired. Or they don't want to get shunned out of their job because, you know, once you get to a certain position in the government, but all of a sudden he's firing this person's being fired, so it's probably best to sit there and keep my mouth shut and don't say anything because this man's going to fire me.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, you can just see how many general officers have been let go by Secretary of Defense Hegseth.
That's unbelievable.
You know, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you know,
Yeah.
the service chiefs and the service secretaries that have either left or decided to leave or were fired.
Yeah.
Never mind the number of generals that are not being promoted because the recommendation, it's a very deliberate process, you know, where services provide, you know, a recommendation to the Secretary of Defense that these officers have met the qualifications to become flag officers, general officers, or admirals. And then to have the numbers removed on the order of what is being done right now is astonishing. It's unprecedented. Yeah. And it's a little scary because, you know, whether it's, you know, you think about the woke discussion, you know, whether it be black or maybe, you know, women or those kinds of things. And I think that is something this Congress has got to be owned up to. Because I don't know if you know this, but every officer has to be approved by the Senate, from lieutenants on up. You know?
Okay.
Now, most of them are automatic, like lieutenants, captains, majors. They don't, but colonels sometimes are controversial. General officers are the ones that are paid attention to, certainly by the Congress. And they have to be able to push back a little bit and ask the question, what's going on here?
Outstanding. Before we get to the final comments, sir, please tell us again, where do we go after this show to learn more about you and your wonderful story? Man, I sit and listen to you speak about this forever. This is unbelievable. But your story and buy your book. So where do we go to get your book, sir?
Go to my website, johnlbarry.org, and you'll see the book. I have another book in there that has to do with being a superintendent, but it's a case study on leadership. And then I also talk about the Columbia Accident Investigation Board and the lessons learned there that can be applied to anybody. I've given hundreds of speeches in this regard to school districts, to universities, to atomic energy plants, to hospitals, to different kinds of organizations, and then because the lessons learned from Columbia also are adaptable to any organization, and certainly as a case study. So the website will give you all that information, and you can pre-order the book. It's officially out September 8th.
Outstanding. Final comments, sir. As you look forward to the future, what are the hopes for the next generation of leaders in the military? In closing, sir, again, we don't want to get too deep into it, but this is something you've done, you're passionate about, you have a great career with this. Just give us a little future, what you think the hope of for the future is for our leaders.
Great question. I hope and sometimes pray that the future, they understand that leadership is not simply about exercising power. It's knowing when and how to restrain it. And that's what our Constitution was built to do. Our forefathers had that knowledge. We need leaders who study history, welcome dissent, understand technology, respect institutions, and place loyalty to the Constitution above loyalty to any individual or political movement. I would tell people to remain curious, like I mentioned about Walter Isaacson, question assumptions. Surround yourselves with people willing to tell you when you're wrong.
Yeah.
And the next generation will face problems we can't yet imagine, but character, judgment, courage, and humility will remain timeless requirements for leadership.
Outstanding. That's a standing ovation for you, sir. We thank you so much for sharing your passion, your wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. We appreciate your service, appreciate what you've done. We appreciate everything you do in the future. Thank you so much.